Where to start in trying to understand the magnitude of what's just happened in Syria? Here in the center of Damascus, just hours ago, still Bashar al-Assad's nominal seat of power. In his dynastic heartland and putative holdout on the Mediterranean coast, where they ride a statue of his father through the streets. In Hama, seized in the Assad era, or Thursday, where a reporter sheds his protective vest to embody the emergence of a new Syria. But perhaps the most instructive place to look is here, in the former regime's darkest corner. The corridors of Saidnaya prison, north of Damascus, where they killed so many thousands, they built a crematorium outside. A young child comes into view. Look at that boy, poor thing, they say. These women, at the heart of a brutal industrial oppression, being freed, being told to say God is great, not to worry about possessions, about ID cards, about where to go and how. Another prison, the same story. He says, there's no state anymore, sister. Damn the state, it's fallen. Come down, come on. Russia's foreign ministry left to confirm that Assad was now out of the country, having left instructions to transfer power peacefully. Assad's prime minister saying he will stay in Syria to hand over government functions to a transitional administration. But for now, real power rests with this man, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, leader of the Islamist HTS forces, listed as terrorists by many countries, that spearheaded the regime's collapse. For days, he's been talking in terms of moderation, of safeguards for minorities. Inside Damascus's Umayyad Mosque, a message of victory for Sunni Islam.
This is a new victory, my brothers, for the entire Islamic nation. Victory, my brothers, marks a new chapter in the region's history. We have avoided the dangers of leaving Syria as a playground for Iranian ambitions, spreading sectarianism and corruption.
The Assad family's home, the vast presidential palace, now a site for a sort of revolutionary tourism, an opportunity to reclaim some of the regime's ill-gotten gains.
Victory to Syria. Syria remains and Assad is in hell, in the dustbin of history.
But for millions of Syria's displaced, it's their own homes they're desperate to reclaim. So often these roads have been clogged with those fleeing to safety. Now the polarity has been reversed, hope embodied in a traffic jam. But still plenty of space for fear of what's to follow. Already there's been fighting between rival rebel groups in the north, the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army taking the town of Manbij from the US-backed and Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. And while Kurds further east celebrate stunning gains over Assad and Iranian-backed forces, fears here about the potential for ISIS to gain ground.
We will also continue to maintain our presence in eastern Syria, which is solely to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS and has nothing to do with other aspects of this conflict.
And rebel forces have entered Tartus, home to one of Russia's 2 Syrian naval bases. What now for Moscow's foothold on the Mediterranean? What now for the many regime loyalists here fearing reprisals? From the occupied Golan Heights, Israel's prime minister claiming credit for events in Syria. The result, he says, of blows dealt to Hezbollah and Iran. Israel sending forces into the UN buffer zone. Syrians know all too well the perils of this moment, but across the country they're choosing to focus on its potential. Nowhere more so than here in Damascus, and a young couple experiencing the revolutionary version of a shotgun wedding.
It's the most beautiful moment of our lives, and because we won't experience this joy twice, I decided my wedding would be today, on 8/12/2024, a date we'll remember. It's an unforgettable day we'll teach our children about.
Just what will this day come to signify? A question perhaps for Syria's as yet unborn generation.
Harry Fawcett reporting. Well, ruling Syria was a family business for the Assads that began in 1971. Here, Edward Heath was prime minister at the time. First Hafez, the father, and then Bashar, the son, who became the heir apparent after his older brother died in a car accident in 1994. The Assad family survived the Cold War, multiple regional wars, and a civil war, But in the end, they couldn't survive the distraction of Russia in Ukraine and Iran and Hezbollah facing off against Israel.
The President of Syria and Mrs. al-Assad, Your Majesty.
Once upon a time in 2002, Assad, the former eye doctor, and his wife, the doctor's daughter from Acton. The young president of Syria was someone that many thought they could do business with.
Syria is going to be an important part of building a peaceful and stable future in the Middle East.
I was there.
The First Lady of Syria was so unlike any other in the region that Vogue called her the Rose of the Desert and put her on the cover. The Assad family became pin-ups of bliss and normality. But family history told a different story. Bashir's father, Hafez, who came from the small Alawite minority, had ruled Syria with an iron fist for over a quarter of a century. He was respected in Moscow and Washington and feared at home. And a decade after the son took power, the Arab Spring came to Syria and the other side of Assad's character came to the fore. In Deraa in the southwest, the regime shot dozens as ordinary citizens echoed the cries of freedom from Tunisia, Egypt and Libya. The former eye surgeon became blind to the suffering of his own people, inflicted by him and his henchmen. In his prisons, torture, including of children, became the norm, and hundreds of thousands of civilians disappeared. The catalogue of brutality mounted, as did the bodies, almost 500,000. Barrel bombs dropped by planes onto residential neighborhoods and hospitals. And in 2018, a chemical attack in Douma that may have killed over 1,000. It was condemned by President Obama, who ended up ignoring his own red lines and stayed on the sidelines. What kept Assad in power was military help from some powerful friends. First, neighboring Iran. The Shia power helping Assad's Alawite Shiite minority. Here, Iran's pin-up commander Qasem Soleimani addressed the troops fighting the Syrian rebels before he was killed by an airstrike ordered by President Trump. And then there was Moscow, whose planes and helicopter gunships ruled from the Syrian air. Putin and Assad had both taken power in 2000. They believed themselves indispensable to the rule that keeps or kept their country together, and increasingly their end justified some brutal means. Syria's civil war exported its consequences. 7 million ended up on the refugee trail in Turkey and Lebanon, and in 2015 on the long trek to Europe. Many of them heading to Germany, huddled masses triggering unintended consequences inside the EU. The rise of the anti-immigrant far right, breathing life into Germany's AfD. New life into France's Marine Le Pen. More life and power into Hungary's Viktor Orban. And even providing Farage's Brexit campaign with perhaps its most powerful, if misleading, poster. President Assad was kept in power by Iran and Russia, and with one distracted by a standoff with Israel and the other by war in Ukraine, they threw him under the bus this week, leaving his country up for grabs. Whoever ends up ruling Syria, and however, the next few months are bound to show once again that what happens in Syria doesn't stay in Syria. Well, with Assad gone and the country in the hands of different groups of rebels, what now for the future of Syria? A little earlier, I spoke to the Syrian columnist and foreign policy expert, Dr. Hyde. He's a consulting fellow at the think tank Chatham House in London. And I began by asking him if he thought that Assad's downfall was made possible by his allies being distracted with other wars.
So if you look at Russia's position, has moved most of its equipment as well as personnel away from Syria because of the war in Ukraine. And it was difficult for them to then allocate the resources needed for Assad to be able to stop opposition fighters. And I think for the Russians, it was sort of their calculations that we have invested all this money and the regime has not been able to fight back, so why would we just go ahead and then repeat the same mistakes again? For Iran, it was a similar situation, especially since Hezbollah, its main arm, not only in the Middle East, but in Syria, which contributed to the protection of the regime for years, is now completely distracted in its own war with Israel.
And so what happens now? Because there are so many different rebel forces, from Kurdish separatists to, Islamists of different, levels of extremism that have converged on the big cities. Who's going to actually run the place now?
Syrians are celebrating today. I think many are trying to figure out what tomorrow holds. The problem right now is, as you mentioned, you have rebel groups, different ones, not only the ones who started the fight, but then you have local armed groups who then also started their own fights in order to liberate their areas from the regime. This is what complicates the situation. How will then the political opposition that is now entering negotiations with different groups will be able to then establish not only contact but influence over the groups that are controlling the territories on the ground, and who will be able to then determine who will have the biggest say in what the transitioning body would look like.
I mean, given the state of the Middle East at the moment, if Syria implodes or becomes chaotic, or there's another kind of civil war that results from this, what are the consequences going to be for the region?
Big consequences. You have the most obvious one will be the new flow of refugees to neighboring countries and potentially to Europe and elsewhere. Then you have the security element. Then you have clashes maybe not only being contained to Syria, but involving other countries, groups even operating from Syria against other countries or carrying out attacks. Then you have the ISIS sort of threat. The group has been gaining sort of more resources, as well as carrying out more attacks in Syria, and this would create a golden opportunity for the group to be able to just carry out attacks, not only in Syria but elsewhere as well.
Of course, power is changing, including in Washington. Mr. Trump takes over at the end of January. I mean, does he have any impact on this new reality in the Middle East?
I think it does. The most obvious one is that most of the influential policymakers in the Biden administration, they have already moved on. They have secured other jobs or in the process of securing other jobs. So there is no one left to really look at what's happening in Syria and then try to play the leadership role that the U.S. has usually played.
Finally, and very briefly, is Iran one of the principal backers of the Assad regime? Are they the biggest losers in this, and what consequences will that have for them?
I think it's safe to say that Iran will be the biggest loser. It seems that Iran will not be able to secure any of its interest in Syria. If you look at what they have been trying to use Syria for over the past years, is one, to continue to supply Hezbollah with weapons, and no matter who basically rules Damascus, it will be difficult for them to allow that, mainly due to the role that Hezbollah has played in killing Syrians across the country for decades.
Dr. Haidai, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thousands of Syrians displaced during the civil war, after enduring often long and perilous journeys, ended up settling right here in the UK. So today, many were out celebrating the fall of the regime that uprooted their lives in gatherings across the country. Some hope to return to Syria one day, but there's anxiety and hope that the news is not too good to be true. Francis Reid reports from one of the rallies in Trafalgar Square.
Celebration after so many sleepless nights, watching events unfold from 3,000 miles away. All those here in Trafalgar Square see the events of the last few days as the liberation of Syria. A chance for change and maybe the possibility for those who want to return to do so. Mayar al-Bakr is a political activist who fled Aleppo in 2015 after government forces came knocking on his door.
I have a mixed feeling. I didn't sleep for the last 2 days. I was just watching the news every single moment, waiting for this moment. We are in a very historical moment. We have so much hope, we hope for better future for Syria.
Then there's Abdul Karim, a neurosurgeon whose 2 little girls were born in exile.
We've been really displaced again and again. So my first daughter was born in Turkey, my second daughter was born in London, and I can't believe that at this moment, that we've been waiting for this moment for not only 14 years, I would say for 54 years, Syrians are waiting for this moment. So I really can't describe how I feel, happiness, optimism, definitely, but really a promise that we will go back to build our country.
A new generation hoping to get to know Syria for the first time.
I don't remember anything of my country, so being able to see my country for practically the first time would be absolutely amazing. I'll get to see all my relatives back home. I'll be really happy, really excited.
Some 20,000 Syrian refugees were resettled in the UK between 2014 and 2020. Many of them never wanted to leave their homes and never imagined that they'd be living here now. And that's why across the UK, so many turned out today, including in Manchester. In West London, Syrian and Iraqi Christians came together to worship. For those in the Syrian Orthodox Church, they hope that reassurances that all will be protected will be honoured in the mosaic of faiths that make up Syria. Do you think many Syrians who moved to the UK will now want to return to Syria?
I think our people, they will have to wait to see what will happen. If safe, democratic, yes, I think majority that return because our country is beautiful. Sunshine, weather, food, everything is our country.
Rula, a primary school teacher, grew up in a neighbourhood where all faiths live side by side.
Mixed emotions, I would say, at the moment. We just want the safety for people, regardless the faith, regardless the religion, regardless the beliefs.
So many have made their lives here in the UK while watching the horrors of war unfold for their families over the last decade. All while conflicts in the wider region and geopolitics of the biggest players buffeted the possibility for peace and fated their futures. There is still anxiety for Syrian communities in the UK, of course, but now also hope that all Syrians' prayers will be answered.